like to tell you that my brain can go 100% on vacation. Sometimes it does. The truth is I need a lot of restoration time these days, and so I take lots of breaks. And oftentimes when I'm on breaks, I still think about stuff. Like the very fact that I can be in my bathing suit in a pine forest and feel safe is privilege. And that for most folks of color, for many folks of color, being in nature is scary. It isn't relaxing because there's a long history of Black folk in particular in America being harmed in isolated places in nature. So I'm sitting with all this, and I'm also I finally finished reading a book that was recommended to me some time ago. It's called Killers of the Dream by Lillian E. Smith. And Lillian E. Smith was a white educator in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And she was actually mentioned by Martin Luther King in the letter from Birmingham jail as some of the few white folks who were really understood racial justice work and understood it and were fostering it and were doing the best they could moving forward and had written about it rightfully. And this book has been profoundly transformative for me. I'm really glad to have taken the time to read it. And as a coach and social justice consultant, I think a lot about how we sabotage the work, even when we don't intend to. And Lillian Smith offered some phenomenal insights. The woman's brilliant as an educator and was with a partner who had a background in psychoanalysis. She just has profound insight into the psyche. I know that she's also very contested because of it, but screw it, I'm going to focus on the positive. So there are 3 ways we sabotage the work, white folk in particular sabotage the work that she talks about, that I want to share with you as we share this walk back. So first, and it's the one that kind of came to mind in this pine forest walk, is that she talks about this contract between the rich white man and the poor white man. And she basically says the contract, the bargain, she says 2 men in a bargain is the call of this chapter. The contract was that the rich white man said to the poor white man, there are 2 jobs to do here. One is to make money, and the other is to keep black men oppressed, black folks oppressed. I'll take care of the first job, and you take care of the second as long as you don't interfere with mine. And so the fiction we live in, and I see this with when we talk into our election discourse all the time, is that poor white folk are voting against their own interests without facing the fact that rich and middle class white folks are the ones making the actual decisions. And that shows up, in particular, Lillian says, in the fact that when black folks were lynched, generally by poor white men, The rich white men would never be there, but they would always make sure they were taken care of in the courts. They would always make sure that they were not held accountable. They would always make sure that they would cover up for them. And it's because they had this bargain that benefited them at the expense of black folk. So after reading that, I can't really stop thinking about it. As I'm walking back in my pine tree forest here, I'm thinking about how thousands of black folk were lynched, and how we continue to blame poor white folk for being ignorant when actually rich white folk are the ones pulling the strings. I think that's still true today. And I think one of the ways we sabotage the work is when we blame poor white folk. And we take away our attention to who is actually pulling the strings. Because we're scared to confront people with actual power to make decisions. Here's another way. Lillian describes in this first chapter a phenomenal theater piece with her students, in which she asks the students to put on a theater piece from Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince, and envision the world they want. And eventually, we're talking about the 40s, one child speaks the truth and says, well, if we're really going to have the world we want, then we have to play with all children, which means we would have to play with black children too. And oh my God, this throws like a bombshell in the theater piece. The kids end up in these huge conundrums. They're asked to impersonate the major forces of Southern society, and they name Southern tradition and religion and consciousness, and the kids finally reach the conclusion that Southern tradition is the only that has ever ruled, but that Southern tradition and religion rule, but conscience has always been in the back seat. That in truth, conscience has never ruled the South. And kids really have to come to terms with what are they going to do with the rest of their theater piece? What are they going to do with the rest of their lives? And after they kind of finalize the theater piece, trying to find a silver lining, which the teachers kind of come up with, of inviting them to envision a better world just so that they're not left powerless, a little girl comes up to her and says, Lillian, how dare you ask me all these questions? I was in the ignorance, the bliss of ignorance, and now you're asking me all these questions I have no solutions for. How dare you upheaval my life this way? I would have rather not known. So this is another way that we sabotage social justice. I think when we're overwhelmed, we oftentimes go to this place of, I rather not know, and I rather not think, and it's too much for me. And I think that's deeply problematic. Like, it's okay to be overwhelmed by issues of social justice. It's okay to be overwhelmed by the state of the world. Well, then we need to take a break. Take a break and rest and recuperate and take some self-care. And then after that, we go and face reality again. But to try to shut out reality from our life because we feel emotionally overwhelmed is ineffective and deeply, deeply sabotaging. And I would argue a lot of where social justice conversations go and don't go are based on what white folks in particular want to see or are not willing to see. Here's the third sabotaging dynamic she talks about. Let things quiet down. I think this is super important. Oftentimes, when things get agitated, when things are brought to the forefront, they're brought to the surface. We white folk go to this place of, ooh, let it quiet down and then I'll say something. No, 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 no. When things are agitated, when there's upheaval, when folks are starting to speak up, that is the moment to speak up. Like, let it be disrupted, let it be agitated. Because we as white folk have been raised to not rock the boat, our instinct is to want things to quiet down first because we're scared to confront the unknown and we're scared to confront disruption. When things are disrupted, that is the time to speak up. That is the time to ally with the folks who are naming whatever the dis-ease is. Whether it's misalignment with our vision, whether it's mispractice with not practicing the values or not practicing what we preach, but whenever there is a group of people or even just one person who speaks out, that is the time to speak up. Do not let things quiet down and then try to go at them subversively from behind the scenes. No, that is not social justice. I mean, there's also a way to do it. Like, I'm not saying like for raising hell is for everyone, but there's a way to even quietly show support. There's also a way to show support without having to raise hell. Like a simple, actually, I know that's hard to hear, but I agree with her. Or, actually, I don't know what we do with this, but it rings true to me. So being able to actually support the disruption instead of easing away from it is a very important skill. And when we don't do that, we white folks sabotage the work every single time. When we get scared of the unknown because things are disrupted and we just want to fix them as quickly as we can, so we try to say the right thing or do the right thing or be quiet just so it gets fixed and it goes away. And then later, more calmly, with a little bit more reflection, we want to bring it back. The energy of the moment is to be in the moment. Allow the disruption to disrupt. And if you want to disrupt, then by all means disrupt. And if that's not for you, don't. But this, I'm going to wait for it to calm down and then come back to it. Oh, that needs to be questioned. That needs to be deeply, deeply questioned. And the way Lillian talks about it, she nailed it when she said that what we tend to do is to say, let it quiet down and then I'll come back to it. That is absolutely one of the ways that we sabotage. And I was so grateful to see it in her writing. Again, the book is Killers of the Dream by Lillian E. Smith, written in 1941, second edition 1961. And Lillian E. Smith is masterful at teaching us as white folk the way that we sabotage the work. And 3 of the ways that I saw in her writing that I highlighted in this video is 1, the way we blame poor whites for their deeds and for the way they vote without acknowledging the fact that rich whites are behind them. 2, the way in which we say, oh, let this die down and then we'll handle it. Like, let this die down and then we'll figure it out. And 3, I just don't want to know. I'm overwhelmed. I just don't want to know.